Day.
Welcome to Hat Day on Church Without Walls. Today we're gonna have a fable. We're gonna talk Aesop. We're gonna talk C.S. Lewis, and we're gonna talk about how Jesus is one of the top 5 reasons that people end up rejecting Christianity. This and more coming up. So you did hear that right. One of the top 5 reasons that people walk away or walk on by Christianity as a faith is Jesus. Now, before you throw a rock at your computer screen or you turn off the show, hang with me, because this is actually not blasphemous at all. It's something that Jesus would agree with and has agreed with, and it's something that the Apostle Paul would agree with too. But let me define it at least by telling you a story first. There's a famous Greek story that Aesop collected and retold. The original version, though, I think is the best, and it's called The Ass in the Lion's Skin. And it goes something like this. A donkey one day found a lion's skin, and he decided to put it on. And he felt different when he put on the lion's skin. He felt bold. And he got a little carried away. And he realized that the other animals, who were never scared of him as a donkey, now feared him. And when he came walking by, they'd scurry out of the way. And he started to get full of himself. He started to actually even believe he was the lion. And then he saw the fox, and he hated the fox because the fox was smart, pretentious, and he had thought on a number of occasions had slighted him as a fool. Might have been just perception. So as he approached the fox, he saw the fear in his eyes, and this really made him feel good, and he got carried away with his disguise, and he roared like a lion, except it didn't come out like a lion's roar. It came out like a donkey's bray. And that's when he saw it, the change in the demeanor of the fox, who seemed to go from fear to that pretentious little animal with the wry smile. And that's when the fox said to him, "You almost had me until I heard you bray." The moral of the story is you can disguise a fool in clothes, but his words will give him away. And so this was carried on throughout, Greek storytelling, and Aesop took it up a notch, but that's my favorite version of it. As a matter of fact, I think it made a big influence on one of my favorite writers, C.S. Lewis, who took the ass in the lion's skin and ended his Chronicles of Narnia with it, with a development of it, as you say. Till We Have Faces, of course, was his masterwork, where he took the myth of Cupid and Psyche and invested it with deep Christian truth to get past the watchful dragons. But not many people realize that he developed the ass in the lion's skin as the last battle. The last battle tells a story about another and different Jesus. And I bring this up to you because I was thinking this week, and this is what I'd like to ask you. And if you want, you could share in the comments below. Or maybe you haven't seen some of these movies or read some of this literature, and you can consider it adding it to your queue during the pandemic. But I was starting to think, what have been some of my favorite types of Christ that I've seen on the movie screen or that I've read in literature? And eventually we're going to come to Aslan, right? Because we're talking about Aslan. I know that's probably my daughter's favorite. One of my daughter's favorite. We got Aslan just sitting next to her. But I was thinking about movies, and I thought, if you haven't seen the movie with Jim Caviezel called I Am David, it's a beautiful type of Christ, as he plays kind of a surrogate father to a boy in a communist concentration camp. He made this movie the same year he made the Passion of the Christ, and ironically, the same Bulgarian actor who plays Pilate in the Passion of the Christ plays the camp commandant in the movie I Am David, and he plays the same role, and so does Caviezel play the same role in both movies. In both movies, you're going to see Pilate and Christ. So I'd recommend you watch them both. But I Am David was one of my favorite types of Christ in all of probably movie history. If you're a fan of John Krasinski, I hope you are, of Some Good News. He made a wonderful movie, and some people didn't watch it because they don't like scary movies or what they think are horror movies. But A Quiet Place is not really a scary movie or a horror movie. It's a movie about family love, familial love. And it's one of the most beautiful types of Christ that I've seen. And so I highly recommend it. As a matter of fact, it's a great movie to watch on Mother's Day because it's really a Mother's Day movie, if you catch my drift. But a beautiful type of Christ is present there. One you might not have recognized, Edward Scissorhands, is a type of Christ. And there might be some that you've recognized that I'm going to leave out here. Maybe one day we'll do a whole show dedicated to allusions to Christ in literature and in movies. But then it hit me about Aslan, and I started to think about Aslan as a type of Christ, a beautiful type of Christ. Of course, if you read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, it kind of slaps you in the face. This lion who sacrifices himself for the guilty and yet rises again because he knew the deeper magic, and he answered the deeper magic. He propitiated the emperor over the sea. But in Lewis's last book of the Narnia series, called The Last Battle, there was another and different Aslan. In other words, Lewis is taking concepts found in Christianity and in reality, and he's putting them into a story form so we could appreciate it maybe in a different way. And you remember, this was a powerful thing for C.S. Lewis because this is how he really came to Christ. This is the challenge that his friend J.R.R. Tolkien presented to him when Lewis was an atheist who thought Christianity was foolishness. And they were talking about the power of myth and of story. And Tolkien stopped him in his tracks on the Addison Walk at one point and said to him, he said, Lewis, why is it that you love the story of the God who dies for his people? Why is it that you love it when you find it in Norse mythology or Greek mythology? Or, why is it that you love those stories, and yet when you come face to face with the true myth, Jesus Christ, the God who becomes man, dies for his people, why do you reject it so? Well, Lewis had never thought of it that way, and he was struck by the turn of the phrase, the true myth, the archetype, if you will, for which every other great story is based on. And this was really the first step in his journey from leaving atheism and accepting theism, and then eventually believing in Christianity. This idea that presented to him by Tolkien, that you seem to love this story when it's robed in Balder the Beautiful, right? But you don't like it when it's Jesus Christ. Why is that? Well, I would grant to you that the reason that Jesus Christ is one of the 5 main reasons that people reject Christianity is there's 2 reasons for that. One is it's not the real Jesus that's presented. And 2, and Paul talks about another different Jesus being an anathema in his letter to the church in Galatia. And so I hate to say this, but Jesus is an adult Barbie doll. you know how there's a Barbie for every occasion. There's a Jesus for every occasion. There's a Jesus that will help you run political campaigns. There's a Jesus that'll help you lose weight, that'll fix your marriage, that'll whiten your teeth, that'll grow hair on your head, that will make your marriage better, that will reconnect you or reconcile you with your alienated coworker or children. There's Jesus as the life coach. You know, there's all these different costumes and outfits we could get for Barbie Jesus too. That we actually make God in our own image. And so we robe Jesus in an American flag and run political campaigns. And we use Jesus to condemn our enemies, to justify maybe our hatred and our bigotry, as the South used Jesus to confirm their right to own other men and to secure their living by the sweat off another man's brow. So, you know, Jesus is malleable, he's flexible, and people can make him and shape him into whatever they desire, and this becomes an ugly Jesus. And I would grant to you that many people who reject Christianity because of Jesus is not, it's not the Galilean, it's not the Nazarene, it's not the Jesus who comforted the woman at the well and yet challenged her. It's not the Jesus we find in the Gospels or even the historical Jesus that we read about that actually overturned the tables and exposed the hypocrisy of the religious and yet comforted those who were sick and broken and sinful. So they've blundered into I don't know, a westernized Jesus or something else that's been presented to them, and it's gross and it's ugly. And rightly, the world has reacted in revulsion, and sometimes wrongly have Christians reacted with adoration. They've worshipped the wrong Jesus. So the last battle is about this, is about the Jesus substitute that, well, you know, there's talking animals in Narnia, and Lewis presents this false Aslan. You know, this simple-minded donkey named Puzzle is sitting with the shrewd, evil ape named Shift, and they find in the river floating a lion's skin. And it's Shift's idea to robe the donkey in this lion's skin, but to present him as the real Aslan in order to manipulate people. He wanted to manipulate Narnia. He wanted to use Aslan to accrue power and influence. And it worked, because there are simple people who actually are fooled by a disguise, as there are today, as there are Christians, and well-meaning, some of them, who go along with this false Jesus, and they end up worshiping a false Jesus and offering a false gospel based on this false Jesus. And we've seen this down through the ages. This is an old story, probably going all the way back to East of Eden. But so Lewis tells this story. Now, I bring this up to you because there's this fascinating letter that he received in 1955, not to do with the last battle, but it was a letter from a mother of a boy named Lawrence. And Lawrence was a fan of Lewis, and he loved the Narnia Chronicles, and yet he expressed to his mother one night at evening prayer, he felt guilt because he had just discovered that his love for Aslan, this type of Christ in Lewis's literature, seemed to be greater than his love of Jesus. And so he brings this up to his mom. His mom writes C.S. Lewis a letter, and Lewis actually responds, and it's a powerful, beautiful response. He responds talking to Lawrence, but writing the letter to the mom. And this is part of his response. that he answers. He says, even if he, Lawrence, was loving Aslan more than Jesus, I'll explain in a moment why I can't really be doing this, he would not be an idol worshiper. If he was an idol worshiper, he'd be doing it on purpose, whereas he's now doing it because he can't help doing it and trying hard not to do it. But Lawrence can't really love Aslan any more than Jesus, even if he feels that's what he's doing, for the things he loves Aslan for doing or saying are simply the things Jesus really did and said. So then when Lawrence thinks he's loving Aslan, he's really loving Jesus, and perhaps loving him more than he ever did before. So the letter goes on from there, and it's really rather touching. But here Lewis is trying to point out that the type of Christ can never be greater than the antitype, than the substance himself. The model can be adored. I mean, let's face it, if I bought, and it's the only one I could afford, if I bought a model of a Lamborghini and it sat on my desk, I could admire it and cherish it, and it could be something I really, really love. And yet it pales in comparison to an actual Lamborghini that pulls up into my driveway with somebody offering me the key. So that's just becoming an adult from an adolescent. So it's actually a helpful thing that Lawrence realizes that there's beauty in Aslan. Sometimes we grow up and we forget that beauty because we're presented with alternatives. We're presented with false Jesuses that are in disguise, that are actually an ass in a lion's skin. And we're right to reject that. There's another reason that people actually reject the true Jesus, too. So there's not just the right reason to be revolted by a false Jesus, by a comical Jesus, by a donkey, by an ass, a jackass in a lion's skin. That's right. And actually, we should celebrate the atheists who reject that Jesus, and we should join them. We might earn their ear when we, instead of being reflexively defensive of false Jesuses because it has the name Jesus attached to it, we should celebrate them burning that straw man. And we should say, yeah, if that's what you think of Jesus, I stand with you and reject that. As Paul did to the Church of Galatia. And I think as an honest man and as a true Christ follower, I need to say that's a false Jesus. And that's an ugly Jesus. What an ugly persona that represents. And it's a false persona. That's a lion that brays. Yeah? But then there's the other side of the coin of people who reject Christianity because of Jesus. And this happened in our Lord's day. When people actually rejected the real Jesus who was standing in front of them, who was breathing the same air, who was treading the same ground in sandals. And when you study the reason that Jesus was rejected, you find out it's because he was convicting. He either convicted them of something that they were trying to hide. Oh, ye hypocrites, right? You brood of vipers. Now, it's interesting to see that the people who rejected that Jesus weren't the sinners. They flocked around him. Luke 15 says that the sinners came to hear him. They desired to hear him. If you're in the ministry right now, if you're a pastor or you have some kind of spiritual leadership role, and for some reason sinners are put off by you, you're not reflecting the true Jesus. You're reflecting a false Jesus, because the true Jesus is beautiful to the sick. Seeing the physician come to a village that is overwrought with sickness is a positive thing, and it's a thing that brings people out of their houses. It also brings out, though, the hypocrites and the self-righteous who want to pick up stones and dismiss you and justify their own misbehavior by pointing to your behavior and slandering you. And so because Jesus was around sinners, they made Jesus a sinner. And Jesus says that on a number of occasions probably, but he says, wait a minute. You rejected John, who came not eating and not drinking, right? He was too austere. You rejected him for that. And now you curse me because I do eat and I do drink. So people who think that Jesus didn't drink or it's not Christian to drink wine, shut up. Just grow up. Grow up and read the scriptures and read what Jesus actually said. But by the way, there's an option there. The Bible or the scripture teaches do everything in moderation. So that's not Jesus giving you a card to get drunk and to get obese, right? Which are still sins. The option of rejecting that, of living the Nazirite vows of John the Baptist, are there too. Jesus didn't rebuke John for not eating and drinking any more than you should rebuke Jesus for eating and drinking. But Jesus points out the hypocrisy and the self-righteous, and he says to him, you rejected John because he didn't eat and drink, and now you rebuke me because I do eat and drink. In other words, you can't win with that group. There are Christians and there are people who are still trying to win with that group because they grew up in that group, because their mom is in that group, because their pastor growing up is in that group, and they're still trying to impress their mom or their former pastor. Sometimes these people are already in the grave, and they're still trying to please these Pharisees and these hypocrites because they're really not followers of Jesus. They're followers of a shadow that they call Jesus, but they've learned this Jesus from that group, from the group standing on the wrong corner in Luke 15. And they're not occupied with what Jesus wants. They're occupied with what mom and grandma want, or what dad wants, or what their husband wants, or their, their wife, or their parents, right? Or their upbringing, or their particular clan or denomination. And so they never really make an effort to discover the real truth. And they're following an ass in a lion's skin. So I bring this up to you because if you've ever seen and fallen in love with a type of Christ in literature or in film, you're actually seeing a greater telling of the real Jesus than you are if you listen to a sermon by John MacArthur or John Piper or any one of it, or John Kirkwood or Martin Luther or John Calvin, any of these people who have systematized and organized all the meaning and the life and the truth out of the one true myth. And so I would plead with you. I know we have curious skeptics watching, some people who don't know where they stand. Are they still a Jesus follower? Are they agnostic or an atheist? And I would ask you, did you love Aslan? Because if you loved Aslan, don't close the door on Jesus. There's a truth in the story that you're missing now. And it may not be your fault. It may be your pastor's fault, or your tradition's fault, or your parents' fault. Don't shut the door on that. If you have a love for Aslan, but you have this distaste in your mouth for Jesus. Look, I'm going to do a short version of my 5 reasons people reject Christianity, and those 5 reasons are going to astound you. I just gave you one. One reason was Jesus. Another reason is not just God the Son, it's God the Father. Another reason is the Bible. But do you know the number one reason that people reject Jesus is the number one reason? It's the same as the number one reason that people accept Jesus. Christians. Now, I'm not just making this up. I can give you polling to back it up. I can give you polling to show that the number one reason people come to accept Jesus is not because they read the Bible or they heard a sermon or or because they read a tract. The number one reason that people say that were first attracted to and end up accepting Jesus is because of the ministry of a friend or a family member in sharing Jesus with them, like Tolkien with C.S. Lewis. But that's also the number one reason that people pass Jesus on by, because they're presented by a friend or a family member with either an ugly Jesus, an ass in a lion's skin, or they're in a state of self-righteousness that looks at the authentic Jesus and doesn't like what they see, because it reflects to them a picture of Dorian Gray that they want to keep hidden in an attic. Because that Jesus makes truth claims that are really uncomfortable for a hypocrite or somebody who's marinated in pride or who's basking in self-righteousness, who doesn't feel that they need a physician. Thank you. So I think these are the two main reasons that people are rejecting Jesus, because they're presented with a false Jesus that's ugly and revolting and deserves to be rejected. As Derek Webb said, unfortunately, because he believes in a Calvinist Jesus, some gods deserve their atheists. Well, the monster Jesus that is created by some systems, who, for his own glory, does unspeakable things that we'd condemn and we'd put to death a human tyrant for doing. That Jesus doesn't deserve his worshipers. And so Derek Webb's right there. Some gods have earned their atheists. And sometimes the most honorable person in the room, when presented with that God, is the atheist. So, but then there's that other side of the coin, where the true Jesus was a curse to some people. See, God sends his son into the world, and Jesus comes into the world, and he's not solely a blessing. As a matter of fact, when at his first hours into the world, it was prophesied by a number of different people who were steeped in the faith that he would be the incitement for the rise and fall of many in Israel. And he would either be a rock that you stand on as the foundation of your life, or he would be a rock that falls on you and crushes you to powder. It's kind of a binary with Jesus there. Not a lot of room for indifference. But this ended up being true. I mean, there were people who responded to the truth and the love of Jesus, and they opened their hands to receive his open hand. And there were people who opened their hands to pick up stones and to kill him. Same Jesus. He was the light of the world, but who rejects the light of the world? Those who like to live in darkness. And you'll find that you'll be surprised about those who like to live in darkness, because the way the New Testament presents it, the way the Bible presents it, is not the way Christians present it today. They'd like you to believe that those living in darkness are those who are eating and drinking and getting merry, for tomorrow they die, Epicureans. They'd like you to believe that it's the atheist who's partying in Vegas at the brothels and the casinos, when actually in the New Testament, it's the religious people. It's the Bible thumpers. It's the very people that put Christ on the cross. You don't find atheists picking up stones against Jesus. You don't find atheists dragging Jesus to Pilate and saying, his blood be upon us and upon our children. So, that's all I've got for you today. I just wanted to suggest something in your mind, and I'd like you to think about this week. What are your favorite types of Christ that you've seen in film or that you've read about in literature? And there are many, by the way, because Jesus inspired so much artwork, not just painted pictures or what Peyton might draw, but stories and poems and hymns. And even, now listen to this, even unbelieving directors and authors use the Jesus myth in their stories. Stephen King is one of them, among them. But many famous authors have adopted the truth around Jesus or Aslan for their own stories, and they're very effective. Why? There's some reason that our soul seems to resonate with middle C when it's struck in the person of Christ. There's a reason we respond to that. Now, if you've stopped responding to the true Jesus, it's one of those two reasons. It's either pride, and that's going to be hard for you to overcome because Jesus didn't even have much success with the self-righteous. Or it's that you are actually judging correctly. You're making the right observations, but possibly the wrong conclusions. In other words, your right observations is that's an ugly Jesus, and if that's God, I won't serve him. You're right there. But you haven't realized that you're being presented with a disguise. It's not the real island. It's not the real lion. It's not the true Aslan. It's puzzle in a lion's skin. And so I'd ask you this week, if you're believers or unbelievers, where do you recognize Jesus in literature? Whether it be A Tale of Two Cities, where you see somebody sacrifice for the benefit and the well-being of another, or as I mentioned before, I Am David. I mean, all throughout great literature and even powerful, powerful movies, you see the type of Christ. Not many people have seen I Am David. Let me make this one last recommendation, then we'll go to Peyton. I Am David is a movie that you want to watch, kind of like Chef. It's a completely different kind of movie, but you want to watch on an empty stomach. You want to plan a dinner around watching I Am David. And may I suggest to you an Italian dinner with freshly baked bread? Because there's a moment in this movie, and I'm not going to ruin it for you, but the boy kind of escapes the gulag and he ends up in Italy trying to travel to freedom. And he's starving and he's hungry and he's outside a bakery and he's admiring the smell of the fresh Italian bread. And oh my gosh, the movie's so good at displaying this. You can smell the bread through the screen. So watch it on an empty stomach, plan an Italian movie, and there's one moment where he comes into contact with an Italian family that take him in for a dinner. Plan a Eucharist around this dinner in the movie. Watch the dinner scene, maybe pause the movie, do the Eucharist with the family, and then watch the rest of the movie. Or the Lord's Supper, if you prefer to call it that. Bread and wine, have bread and wine there. And I'll tell you, it'll be a spiritual moment that your kids and your family will never forget. And then realize Jim Caviezel in this movie is a type of Christ. And we're all that little lost boy. So I Am David. It's a movie no one knows about because it was greatly overshadowed by The Passion of the Christ. Came out the same year with the same actors. And by the way, if you haven't seen The Passion of the Christ, watch them back to back because you'll really be moved how these two different movies. And by the way, I Am David was made before The Passion of the Christ, but it was screened after. So you'll really be moved by, and the Bulgarian actor, forgive me, his name escapes me, but the Bulgarian actor who plays Pilate and the camp commandant is actually exceptional. And you'll really be moved by the play between Pilate and Christ in both movies. So that's my recommendation to you for this week. You've got time, you're in the middle of a pandemic, watch I Am David, plan an Italian movie, make it a whole family night or date night or what have you. Italian, beautifully baked bread, a good bottle of red, Lord's Supper. I'm going to do this week. We're going to do this week. We'll do the Lord's Supper for it, and it'll breathe life into your Lord's Supper if you just read a few verses and do the same thing every week with your family and they're getting bored of it. Breathe life into the Lord's Supper. Do it with Buzz Aldrin on the moon. And do it with Sir Launfal, on coming home from coming home from one of the Crusades. But anyway, find ways to breathe life into something that's the most sacred moment in some of our lives, especially during quarantine. Now, I promised we'd go to Peyton, and Peyton, I'm gonna
see my tooth, my loose tooth. The tooth I lost in the camera.
You're trying to show your lost tooth.
No, I'm trying to see it.
Oh, you're trying to see it. Right there it is.
Okay.
There's your lost tooth.
I think a tooth growing in.
By the way, folks, it's Hat Day because right before the show,
I'm a kitty.
I cut my head and I've got this mark right there, and I thought it would be distracting for you to watch. And my wife tried to put makeup on it. It's still bleeding. Sorry. But I don't want to be a hypocrite. Peyton thought we should put makeup on it during the show. She's like, why don't we do a pre-show show? Because people would love to see behind the scenes.
I want to do a behind-the-scenes video because Mommy and Daddy go funny.
Yeah, we're really hilarious, right? To the moon, Alice. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll show my pretty picture.
All right, hold on. Let me cut to this.
So it's a costume party. So this is the donkey, and it's wearing a lion, and the lion is dressed up as a beast. See, that's a wing, and that's a buzzer, and the black straps on some of the animals are just like straps, so the costume stays on.
The lion is dressed as a what?
A bee.
Oh,
a bumblebee.
A bumblebee.
See, that's the singer that's still wearing, and the donkey's dressed up as a lion.
So lions at a costume party. I love this.
And then this is a fox, and it's dressed up as a peacock.
The fox is dressed as a peacock. And is that box over there, is that Pandora's box?
Maybe. I thought it was a costume box, but
all right.
That's cake. Those are goodie bags, balloons, and those are the punch area. See, these are cups. That's a stack of cups. And then this is a punch area with a spoon to get the punch.
All right. So, folks, thanks for watching. Thanks for those who support the Sparrow's Call. We've got 2 great interviews coming up today that'll be released a little by little over the next few weeks. We're interviewing the Vice President of BioLogos. His name is Jim Stump, about a book that just came out that he put together called 5 Views of Original Sin, which will be fascinating. And then later today, we're interviewing biologist Joel Duff, who wrote a book about the Grand Canyon and who is a devout believer in Christ and yet talks about places where science and faith either intersect or sometimes collide, and how we can avoid having a collision between science and faith and see how they're harmonious in the larger picture. So some great interviews coming up for you all. I hope your quarantine is manageable. Remember, bring your burdens to the Lord and put them on Him. Share each other's burdens. That's what we're told to as brothers and sisters in Christ. And be grateful for what we have, what we do have. So, and try and practice gratitude daily. So that's all. We'll see you next week.